Namaste, Witchlings, and welcome back to Bitchin Witch. I'm Di the Yoga Witch, and this is the space where we take a look at the stories shaping our communities, our spiritual lives, and sometimes our wider world. Now, if you're new here, hey, hi, hello, welcome. Bitchin' Witch is part current events, part commentary, part community conversation, and on occasion, me falling down a research rabbit hole and dragging all of y'all with me, because it's fun. This week is one of them stories. One of them weeks, we're going to start by talking about recent changes affecting queer veterans and why support structures matter. Then we're going to take a look at an investigation involving Major League Baseball, religious expression, and the complicated intersection of workplace policies, faith, and civil rights. Then, after our little ad break, we're diving into a story that has absolutely fascinated me for the better part of 2 to 3 years. It starts with a small metaphysical shop in Hanover, Pennsylvania. It involves tarot readings, an obscure law dating back to the Civil War, a police chief, a lawsuit, and what has now become a constitutional challenge with implications far beyond one small little town. If you've been around the pagan community online, you may already know exactly who I'm talking about. If you don't, no worries. By the end of today's episode, you will understand why this story matters. Because despite how different these stories may seem on the surface, they all revolve around one common question. Okay, a couple of common questions. Who gets recognized? Who gets supported? Who gets equal treatment under the law? And who gets to exist openly without fear of being singled out for who they are, what they believe, or how they practice their faith? These questions affect veterans, athletes, witches, and, well, they affect all of us. So, go grab your coffee, tea, water, energy drink, Gatorade, or emotional support beverage of choice. Settle in, and let's get into it, shall we? This is Bitchin' Witch. All right. So our first segment, the VA, queer veterans, and what in the cinnamon toast fuck are we doing? So, before we get into today's main story, I want to talk about something that's been making me a bit cranky. And not just regular old cranky, I mean veteran cranky. The Department of Veterans Affairs recently issued some guidance directing facilities to end gender identity-based programs and activities within the Veterans Health Administration. Among other changes, queer veteran care coordinators are being reclassified as simply care coordinators. Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, well, that's just a title change, let me explain why people are concerned, because this is not happening in a vacuum. The VA itself has acknowledged for years that LGBTQIA veterans often face unique barriers when seeking health care. The VA's own materials have discussed how queer veterans may avoid seeking treatment because they fear discrimination, stigma, or just being treated differently. That is not political. That is not activist rhetoric. That is the VA's own fucking research. So, my immediate reaction was, what in the cinnamon toast fuck are we doing? Seriously. How many times do we have to learn the same fucking lesson? If we know a group of people faces barriers to care and we create resources specifically designed to help them navigate those barriers, why is removing those resources suddenly considered progress? And before somebody starts rage typing in the comments, let's get something straight here. This ain't about special treatment. Nobody is asking for special fucking treatment. They're asking for competent treatment. They're asking to be able to access health care without wondering whether they're going to be judged, dismissed, or misunderstood. As a veteran myself, I'm so fucking tired of watching people treat veterans like we're one giant fucking monolith group. We are not, never have been. We're men, women, queer, straight, trans, disabled, religious, pagan, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, atheist, neurodivergent as fuck. We are people. should not have said it that way because now I'm hearing we are farmers. And people have different experiences and different needs. Recognizing that reality isn't fucking discrimination, it's good health care. It's the same reason the VA has programs for women veterans. It's the same reason there are resources for homeless veterans. It's the same reason there are specialized services for PTSD, military sexual trauma, and substance use recovery. Because different populations face different challenges. And pretending those differences don't exist doesn't magically solve them. What concerns me most, though, is not the administrative language. It's the fucking message. And yes, I'm going to be dropping F-bombs left, right, and sideways here. I'm pissed. Because policies send messages. And if queer veterans start hearing the message that their specific concerns are no longer important enough to acknowledge, some of them are going to stop reaching out for help. And that right there, that's where this becomes dangerous. Because when people don't feel safe seeking care, they don't seek care. When they don't seek care, conditions get worse. Mental health gets worse. Physical health gets worse. Isolation gets worse. And then everybody acts surprised. I've seen this movie before. Most veterans have. I personally served during the era of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I remember what happens when people are told that parts of who they are need to remain hidden. Hell, an ex-boyfriend of mine got discharged from the Navy on a Don't Ask, Don't Tell discharge. I remember what happens when honesty feels unsafe. And I don't want us moving backward. I want us moving forward. Now, you may agree with these policy changes. You may disagree with them. Reasonable people can have those conversations. But here's where I stand. A veteran is a veteran. Full stop. No asterisk. No footnote. No exceptions. And every veteran deserves access to care, dignity, respect, and the ability to walk through the doors of their local VA knowing they belong there. Because they earned that care, they earned that respect, and they sure as fuck shouldn't have to fight for either one of them after they come home. We'll keep watching this story, but for right now, I want you to think about this. Representation is not about making people feel special. It's about making people feel safe enough to walk through the God's damned door. And that's something worth protecting, isn't it? Moving on. Let's shift gears for just a minute. And we're going to talk about a different story that's been making the headlines. This one entertains me slightly. The Department of Justice has opened an investigation into Major League Baseball regarding potential religious discrimination. The issue centers around players who wanted to place religious messages and Bible verses on special edition Pride Night caps. MLB's position has reportedly been that uniform modifications are not allowed, regardless of what the message says. The DOJ is now looking into whether those restrictions may have infringed on religious rights. And honestly, this is one of those stories where I think it's really easy to just pick a team and stop thinking. But, I'd rather do what we do here and actually sit with the complexity for just a minute. Because civil rights questions are often more complicated than social media wants them to be. Now, if you've been hanging around this channel for more than about 5 minutes, I'm pretty sure you already know where I stand on queer rights. I support my queer siblings. I support pride. I support people being able to exist openly and authentically. That honestly shouldn't surprise anybody who knows me. But supporting queer people does not mean I stop caring about religious liberty. And supporting Try that again. Supporting religious liberty doesn't mean I stop caring I'm starting this whole freaking paragraph over because my brain just melted. Supporting queer people doesn't mean I stop caring about religious liberty, and supporting religious liberty doesn't mean I stop caring about queer people. The challenge is figuring out how those rights coexist. Because in a diverse society, they kind of have to. Here's the question I find interesting and kind of amusing. Where is the line between neutral workplace rule and religious discrimination? If MLB says nobody is allowed to alter uniforms regardless of the message, that's a different situation than saying certain messages are prohibited while others are allowed. And that's exactly why investigations like this exist. Not to determine whether Christianity is right, not to determine whether pride is right, but to determine whether policies are being applied consistently, because consistency matters. Now, I know some people are already out there sharpening their pitchforks. Half the internet is already yelling, it's discrimination against Christians. And the other half is screaming, it's discrimination against queer people. And meanwhile, I'm sitting over here with my cream soda Dr. Pepper. Actually, it's regular Dr. Pepper today. And wondering if everyone could maybe just take a breath and read the damn facts. Because what interests me isn't the outrage, it's the principle. If we're going to defend civil rights, we have to defend them consistently, not just when they benefit people we agree with, not just when they support causes we personally champion. Consistency is where the real test happens. And that's uncomfortable because it forces us to think beyond our immediate emotional reaction. The reason I wanted to include this story today is because it connects directly to the larger theme of this particular episode. Who gets protected, who gets accommodated, who gets equal treatment? And how do we balance competing rights in a diverse society? They're not easy questions, and honestly, they're not supposed to be, but they are important questions, and they're questions that deserve more than just a headline on a hot take. So, this is another story I'm going to keep watching, because whether you're talking about religion, sexuality, gender identity, or spiritual beliefs, the challenge remains the same. Can we create systems that treat people fairly and consistently? That's the real question, and frankly, it's a lot more interesting than the internet screaming match. We're going to take a quick break here, tell you about a couple of little things, and then we'll be back with another story. Hey, Witchlings, it's time to take a step into dietheyogawitch.shop, where magic meets movement and your growth is supported on and off the mat. This is a space where space for transformation, where yoga and life coaching come together to help you move forward with clarity, confidence, and a purpose at a pace your nervous system can actually sustain. Alongside this practice, you will find handmade, intention-infused jewelry and some Die the Yoga Witch merch like coffee mugs, t-shirts, hoodies, and more. Yes, including some things for our furry familiars, which your mama couldn't leave the critters out. So we can all carry just a little bit of magic with us each and every day. Tarot and oracle readings are also available when you're seeking insight, and there are a limited number of local services offered for those in the Puget Sound region. But the heart of this space is supporting your daily practice, your growth, and your connection to yourself. If something in your life is shifting, growing, or simply asking for deeper intention, please take this as your sign. Come explore what we can create together at dietheyogawitch.shop. If you happen to be enjoying this episode of this podcast and feel called to become part of our little coven, please feel free to click the join button and become a channel member. There are some awesome perks waiting for all of my witchlings, and membership levels start at just a single $1 a month. How affordable is that, y'all? Now, if membership isn't in the cards for you right at the moment, you can still support our channel here for free by subscribing and sharing this video with a friend, and you can find all of the other ways to support me and find me on social media on my link tree right here. I appreciate all of you guys and your support. Thank you so very much for tuning in. Now, let's get back to the show. All right. Here we go. After everything we have chit-chatted about so far, I want to tell you a story. And fair warning, my witchlings, this is one of those stories that sent me down a research rabbit hole. You know the kind. The kind where you start by reading one article about this, and the next thing you know, you're researching Civil War era laws at 1 o'clock in the morning. Right, good. Just proves to everybody in the world I am definitely an ADHD witch. So our story here begins in Hanover, Pennsylvania. Not with a crime or a scandal or even a public controversy. It simply begins with a small business spotlight. A local organization featured a new downtown business called the Serpent's Key. The article was exactly what you would expect from a little community newsletter. Talked about local artists, community building, classes, metaphysical products, education, creating a welcoming space. The owner, Beck Ravenswood, spoke about wanting to help people learn more about metaphysical practices and reduce fear and misunderstanding surrounding things like witchcraft and tarot. Pretty wholesome stuff. Honestly, yeah, that sounds a lot like me here. That's probably why this story resonates with me. And honestly, reading it now, what's remarkable isn't what the article says. That's what it doesn't say. There's no controversy, no allegations, no complaints, no drama, just a local business owner introducing themselves to the community. And then, almost as an afterthought, the article mentions that the Serpent's Key offers tarot readings. One single sentence, that's it, just one ittle bitty sentence, and somehow that sentence would eventually become part of a federal constitutional challenge. Now, when I first heard about this story, I assumed there had to be something else. You know, surely there was some larger conflict, maybe a major public dispute or an angry campaign against the business, but no, at least not at the beginning. Instead, according to reporting, Hanover Police Chief Chad Martin became aware of the article and the mention of tarot readings. What happens next is where things start getting interesting. Beck later reported that they were informed the chief intended to visit the shop regarding a Pennsylvania statute related to fortune telling. And eventually, two officers, the police chief and another unnamed officer, arrived at the Serpent's Key. They were not in uniform. They were in what a lot of us refer to as their off-duty uniform, you know, the polo shirt with the seal or whatever on the shirt. And here, it's important to note that there were no charges filed, no arrests made, no criminal prosecution occurred at all. But, according to Beck, the officers discussed Pennsylvania's fortune-telling law and informed them that paid tarot readings could potentially fall under that statute. And that's where the story exploded. Because suddenly, people started asking questions. Wait, Pennsylvania has a fortune-telling law? I mean, a real one? In the year of our Lord 2023, there is a fortune-telling law on the books in Pennsylvania. The answer was yes, and not just any law. A law that dates back to 1861. We're going to say that date again, 1861. This law is older than cars, airplanes, radio, television, the internet. Hell, it's even older than fucking sliced bread and Betty White. And yet, there it was, still sitting on the books, still technically enforceable. And suddenly, a local tarot reader found themselves face to face with the reality of it. Now, whether you agree with Beck's interpretation of the encounter or the chief's interpretation of the encounter isn't really our point here. The point is that the interaction raised a much bigger question. A question that would eventually move far beyond one little storefront in Hanover. Because once people learned this law existed, the conversation stopped being, can Beck offer tarot readings, and became, should this law exist at all? And that's where things started getting really, really interesting. I do want to point out that we have talked about this case at least one other time on this podcast. This is a newer update to it. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the law itself. Because if you're anything like me, the first thing you probably thought when you heard this story was, surely, honestly, this law cannot still be a thing. And yet, here we are. The Pennsylvania statute at the center of this entire case dates back to 1861. The law makes it a crime to pretend for gain or profit, to tell fortunes or predict future events through cards, palm reading, astrology, or similar methods. On paper, it's a third-degree misdemeanor. The potential penalties include fines and even jail time. Now, I want you to think about that for a second, y'all. A law written during the Civil War, a law older than modern telephones, airplanes, or radio, is still sitting on the books in 2026. And according to reporting on this case, it's rarely ever enforced, which raises an interesting question. If it's rarely enforced, why does it matter? And the answer is kind of simple. Because laws don't have to be enforced every day to affect people's behavior. Sometimes the existence of a law is enough, especially when someone in authority reminds you it's there. That's where Beck's concerns began. According to court filings and public reporting, the issue wasn't simply whether they were going to be arrested that day. The issue was the possibility that the law could be used in the future. Because if a law exists and remains enforceable, then every person practicing under that law's shadow has to make decisions based on that reality. Can I advertise my services? Can I charge for my work? Can I grow my business? Can I openly discuss what I do? Can I trust that I won't become the next fucking target? And those questions matter. And really, they matter regardless of whether you're talking about tarot readings, astrology, palmistry, or any number of other spiritual and metaphysical practices. I'm going to pause real quick and say, yes, I am bumbling words. I have POTS. It is a very warm day and my brain is melting. Please bear with me. Now, Beck could have simply stopped offering readings. I mean, a lot of people probably would have. A large number of people would probably have decided it wasn't worth the headache. Instead, Beck contacted an attorney, and that's where this story takes a turn. Because attorney Alexa Gervasi looked at the statute and asked a question that sits at the heart of this entire fucking case. Is this law constitutional? More specifically, can the government criminalize speech simply because someone is being paid for it? That's where the First Amendment enters the conversation. The argument put forward by Beck's legal team is that tarot readings are a form of speech and expression, and speech doesn't lose constitutional protection simply because money changes hands. Think about that one. Authors, paid. Teachers, paid. Therapists, definitely paid. Public speakers get paid. Consultants get paid. Ministers occasionally get paid. Hell, especially if they're performing a wedding. Entire fucking industries exist around people sharing knowledge, opinions, guidance, and interpretation. So, where does tarot fit into that framework? That's the question. And whether you personally believe tarot can predict the future is actually, well, beside the point. The government doesn't generally get to decide which beliefs are acceptable and which beliefs are not. The government doesn't get to determine which spiritual practices are real enough to deserve protection. At least, that's the argument being tested in court. So, August of 2024, Beck filed suit against Hanover Borough Hanover Borough, and the police chief in his official capacity. And suddenly, this wasn't just a local disagreement anymore. This became a constitutional challenge. Not just, can Beck read tarot, but can Pennsylvania continue enforcing a law like this at all? And once that question entered the courtroom, the stakes got a whole lot bigger. Oh, let me take a sip, and we'll move on to the next segment, because this is getting good, isn't it, y'all? Now, dun dun dun. Here's where the story takes another turn. I lost it. There we go. Because, well, if this were just a lawsuit between a local business owner and a local government, we'd probably never be talking about it here on Bitchin Witch. But, this case didn't stop there. Recently, a federal judge denied an attempt by the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office to have the case dismissed. And that's a big fucking deal, because it means the court looked at the arguments being presented and decided they deserved to be heard. This wasn't something to be thrown out immediately. This wasn't something the court viewed as obviously frivolous. This was a question worth examining. And one of the most fascinating parts of the ruling centers around a single word in the statute: pretend. Remember, the law says a person is guilty if they, quote, pretend for gain or lucre, unquote, to tell fortunes or predict future events. The state's argument suggested that pretending implied deception, that someone pretending to do something impossible is inherently misleading people. But Judge Jennifer Wilson was not entirely convinced by that logic. In one of the most memorable passages I've read in a legal ruling in a very long time, she offered an example. And I love this example. She wrote that a child pretending to be sick might be trying to deceive their parents into letting them stay home from school. But a child pretending to be a great white shark isn't necessarily deceiving anyone. The parents know the child isn't actually a shark. No fraud has occurred and no one has been tricked. And suddenly we're having a very different conversation. Because if pretending doesn't automatically mean deceiving, then what exactly is this law prohibiting? And that's one of the questions the court may ultimately have to answer. Now, at this point, the story has become much larger than just one tarot reader. It's become larger than just one shop, or just little bitty Hanover Borough. The question now is whether Pennsylvania can continue to enforce a law that criminalizes certain forms of spiritual, metaphysical, or expressive activity, and whether doing so is consistent with the First Amendment. And that's where I find this case so fucking fascinating, because you don't have to be pagan to care about it. You don't have to read tarot or believe in astrology. You don't even have to know the difference between a pentacle and a pentagram. The larger question affects everyone. How much power should the government have to determine which beliefs, practices, or forms of expression are legitimate, and when does regulation become censorship? Those are questions worth asking. Now, something else happened while this case was unfolding that I found genuinely beautiful. Beck didn't just file a lawsuit and disappear into the legal process. They turned to community. Recently, Beck, I forgot to get the screenshot here to the man behind the curtain. Recently, Beck invited supporters to join them in a coordinated candle working focused on protection, justice, and support for the case. Now, whether you personally view that as a prayer, meditation, ritual, spell work, focused intention, or simply community solidarity, it really isn't the point. What matters is what it represents. A person found themselves facing a challenge, and instead of standing alone, they called their community together. There's something profoundly human about that. For thousands of years, right? Human beings have gathered around candles, fires, altars, circles, sanctuaries, and sacred spaces when facing uncertainty. We do it because community matters. We do it because hope matters, and because none of us are meant to carry everything alone. And I think that's the real heart of this story. Not the tarot cards, not the lawsuits, not the legal filings. Community. A person trying to create a welcoming space. A community rallying around them, and a larger conversation about who gets to openly practice their beliefs without fear. I've been following this story for quite a while now, close to the beginning of it, and I'm going to continue following. And I'm going to say this: if Beck Ravenswood ever happens to stumble across this episode, the invitation is open. I would love to have you join me on Bitchin Witch someday to talk about this. I'd love to hear your story in your own words, because at the end of the day, this isn't really a story about tarot readings. It's a story about rights, a story about community, and it's a story about what happens when ordinary people decide some things are really worth standing up for. And personally, I think that's a story worth telling. Now, I'm going to share the screenshot I took of the candle lighting information, and I will share it on social media. I will throw it into the community's portion of the YouTube channels here. I apologize for slipping a cog and not making sure that the man behind the curtain had it. So, as we wrap up for today, I want to come back to the question that connects every story we've talked about. At first glance, I will admit these topics don't really seem related. The VA and queer veterans, Major League Baseball and religious expression, a tarot reader in Pennsylvania challenging a Civil War era law. 3 completely different stories, completely different communities, and 3 completely different circumstances. And yet, underneath all of them is really the same questions. Who gets to belong? Who gets recognized? Who gets supported? And who gets equal protection under the law? Perhaps most importantly, though, do we apply those principles consistently? Because it's easy to support rights when they're protecting people who look like us. It's easy to defend freedom when it's benefiting people we agree with. The real test comes when we're asked to extend those same protections to people who are different from us. People with different identities, different beliefs, different backgrounds, and different experiences. That's where principles stop being slogans and start becoming values. As a veteran, a witch, yoga instructor, and someone who has spent a very large portion of her life existing outside what society considers normal, these questions matter to me. And it's not because I expect everyone to agree with me or because I expect everyone to share my beliefs. I don't. But because I believe people deserve the freedom to exist openly and honestly without fear of being erased, singled out, or treated as less than. That definitely does not mean we all agree. It doesn't mean we all think the same way. And it doesn't mean difficult conversations just disappear. But it does mean we start from a place of shared humanity. And frankly, I think the world could use a lot more of that right now. So, whether you're a veteran trying to navigate the headache of the healthcare system, a baseball fan trying to make sense of yet another headline, a witch running a small business like me, or someone who just stumbled across this podcast because the algorithm decided to get weird today, thank you for being here. Thank you for caring enough to stay curious. Thank you for being willing to think a little deeper than the headlines. And thank you for helping create the kind of community where conversations like these can happen. If you'd like to support our show, you'll find links in the description box for memberships, classes, readings, and all of the other things to help keep this little corner of the internet running. And if you're new here, I would absolutely love for you to subscribe and join us again. So, until then, until next time, my witchlings, keep asking questions, keep learning, keep showing up for one another. Stay informed, stay magical, and stay angry. And then go out there, spread love, spread joy, spread kindness. Because there is so much hate and discontent and darkness. Let us try to be beacons of light, love, and hope for those stumbling in the darkness. Make sure your loved ones, in all their forms, 2 legs, 4 legs, wings, fur, scales, paws, claws, make sure they all know exactly how much you care about them. Time is not a strict progression of cause to effect. It's far more of a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff that moves a hell of a lot faster than we want to acknowledge, meaning those chances to say I love you one last time are not ever guaranteed. Now, if you take one thing away from everything I say and do here every day and every week, I want it to be you always, always remember this. You are loved, you're wanted, you're needed, and you do have a reason for being here. You just might not know it yet. I love you guys all so very much. Love you guys. I hope every single one of you has a fantabulously magical rest of your day or night wherever you are. I will see you guys soon. Namaste, witchlings.